I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. Today I have with me Nathan Rotman, the regional VP. Is that right? VP of Airbnb in Canada?
Not quite VP, regional lead.
Regional lead. There you go. Hey, you should be the VP. How's that?
Tell my boss.
There you go. There's a plug for you right there. I did a recent interview with Premier Eby. I actually did it last Friday. And Airbnb's been coming up in lots of discussions with us. And I asked him the question, because even one of his own candidates, Loyal Woodridge, an NDP candidate, had came out and said that there needs to be a made in Kelowna solution because tourism in Kelowna has suffered dramatically. And Renee Merrifield, another MLA for British Columbia, has also said that it's devastating the tourism industry, and Loyal echoed those concerns. But when I asked Premier Eby, he did say he supports like candidates speaking for themselves, but it sounded like absolutely not will they be changing the legislation.
Yeah, that's not a surprise. I mean, the premier is looking for things to do on the housing market, and we appreciate that. It's obviously a very important issue, no matter where you are in Canada. What we can say is that we don't think that this legislation is going to have the impact that he thinks it will have on the housing market. And what we're seeing in places like Kelowna, from what we're hearing from wineries and other small businesses, is that it is actually hurting tourism this summer as this law starts to be implemented throughout the province.
Yeah, and then there was, I did ask him too, because on LinkedIn, Ingrid Jared, the former CEO of I think she's just retiring, of the BC Hotel Association, celebrated the fact that they were one of the leads in being responsible for this legislation. And I asked Premier Eby if that was the case, and he said absolutely not, that they didn't have anything to do with writing the legislation.
No matter where we are in the world, we see the hotel industry always trying to find ways to limit its competition. And so we saw this in New York City most recently. We saw this in British Columbia. Twice in the last year, the Hotel Association has funded studies around affordable housing and the impact of short-term rentals on affordability in British Columbia. Twice in a row, they've had their studies have had the same results. And we're not surprised by this. What we saw in New York City, and we're just 1 year into New York City's law being implemented, is that after short-term rentals were significantly reduced in the city because of a very unusual approach to legislating by even Vancouver, Toronto, Chicago, Los Angeles standards. What we saw is that the only beneficiary from the reduction in short-term rentals has actually been the hotel industry. That hotel prices have gone up 8%, or just about 8%. In the last year since that rule came into effect. And when we look at the law came into effect in New York in September, when we look at Christmas of that year, we saw prices up close to 20% from the year prior. And so there is a clear winner. When you reduce supply, you can raise your prices. And that's what the hotel industry seems to be focused on.
Yeah, we did a Canadian press story just the other day too. And there's the study right there. And it said in this McGill study that in British Columbia, it's reduced rents by 5.7%, which equals about $600 million last year, and an average of $147 per month per rental. And this study, again, the report says the BC Hotel Association commissioned the research to provide an early analysis of the province short-term rental rules. So there you go. So another study by the BC Hotel Association.
Yeah, and again, so paid for by the BC Hotel Association. But what we also know is that in every place where we've been regulated, we haven't seen these kinds of results. And so if we look at the real data from places like Vancouver, from places like Toronto, from places like New York City, Vancouver regulated us in 2018. Every month that followed that regulation coming into effect, we saw rents increase. Toronto regulated us in 2021. Every month that followed, except for, most recently where we've seen some general drop across Canada in rental prices, which is great news for Canadians. But it's because of a multitude of factors, not because of a law that came into effect a few months ago and is just in the process of getting ramped up. But we saw Toronto rents increase. So in Vancouver, just as a really good example of what you're talking about, we gave Vancouver in 2018 all of the data of all of the hosts operating in the city. We removed people who didn't have licenses from operating in the city. Every month that followed, except for at the height of the pandemic in 2020, and most recently, as we've seen a few months of rent decreases across all of Canada, nothing special in Vancouver or British Columbia, we have seen rents increase despite all those short-term rentals leaving. In New York City, we removed thousands, and I'm talking thousands of short-term rentals from the market as of September of last year. Rents have increased 3.5%. Vacancy rates remain exactly where they are. And the only beneficiary has been hotel prices going up by about 7.5% since then.
Yeah, I know that I went to the fully charged show last year, and I stayed in Airbnb, and I think I was paying around, just under $300 a night for a space, because I like to cook my own breakfast, just eat healthier. And then this year I went to go down there, and it was just for like your average hotel room. I was looking at $800 a night plus parking plus, right? So so I decided not to go. I just thought that it seemed like too much for a one night stay. I just didn't go.
Yeah. And we're finding that in some cases. And when we put out a study about a year ago showing, people are less likely to go to certain places when they're looking for travel experiences. But you also have to think about some of the places where our listings exist, but hotels don't exist. And so I'm thinking about, the outer boroughs of New York City. I'm thinking about the suburbs of Vancouver. People are going to Pitt Meadows to visit their family. They're going to see their niece graduate. They're going for a family event, a wedding, a funeral, whatever. They're not always going to every place because they're looking for touristic experiences. And so, and I'm not picking on Pitt Meadows here. I'm just saying that like suburbs and certain communities are made for different types of experiences, but often it's families visiting. And when you restrict those opportunities, you're restricting some of the economic impact that comes with that. We are not saying that there should be no regulation by any stretch of the imagination. We believe that we should be working collaboratively with municipalities, but there should be a made in Kelowna approach. There should be a made in Kamloops approach. There should be a made in Vancouver approach. And where those laws exist, we will always work with that municipality to support the implementation of those laws. BC's one size fits all with a few limited exceptions there isn't the right approach. We're happy to hear things like from candidate Woolridge, suggesting that there should be a review. We're happy to hear from certain mayors in BC saying there were certain areas of our city that were built for tourist accommodation, and we want that to continue.
I think that's the loyalist point here for Kelowna, that it was zoned properly. These are tourist zones. People invested in those properties based on that, and that's how they built their cash flow model. And then now it's been, to some of those people, they think it's expropriated and that they just can't cash flow it now, and then they just can't afford it. And I know my son actually bought a place that he couldn't afford the payments on it without Airbnb it for part of the year, right? So, I mean, that's how he was able to buy a place, right? So that he lives in it part-time, and then he, rents it out in the high peak summer times.
That's right. I have a friend here in Toronto who rents out when it has his home on Airbnb and rents it out when he has a booking, moves in with his girlfriend to be able to help pay that mortgage.
Yeah, he just keeps moving back home. So, I mean, I guess.
That's the problem for the Bank of Dad. That's a different problem. Yeah.
And I've done a lot of interviews with realtors that are, defending their clients, and they're talking about, like suing and all that kind of stuff. Is there anything that Airbnb is doing to help people like that are kind of like dissatisfied with this regulation?
We're going to continue to advocate for changes to this law. And obviously there's an election in British Columbia. Voters will have their decisions in the coming months. But at the moment there is a lawsuit run by a couple of hosts out in Victoria who filed the suit in the courts in British Columbia, and we're obviously monitoring that very closely. Yeah,
because I know John Rustad, the leader of the BC Conservatives, said that he'll remove the legislation, and then Kevin Falcon said the same thing, but obviously he's no longer in the race or whatever. So.
Yeah, and even the Green Party suggested that there may be some changes that they would like to look at, and so we're encouraged by that. Obviously, we hope that Premier Eby and Minister Kahlon listen to what voters are saying over the course of the next couple of weeks and hear some of the stories of hosts and individuals who are being impacted. Because I don't think that what we're seeing in this report that came out from the Hotel Association is what British Columbians are really feeling on the ground. Rent in Vancouver, just as an example, has gone up 40% since 2017. The law that restricted short-term rentals came into effect in 2018. People are still hurting. And so to argue there is some kind of, the tinkering around the edges of what is a tens of thousands of unit problem is going to solve this problem is simply untrue.
Wouldn't you think that the report would have more weight if it wasn't funded by somebody that has a vested interest in the outcome.
I concur with your assessment there.
Yeah, and then you take care of Canada. So BC's got this legislation. Where else is it Airbnb being impacted, and where, like, if you look to Alberta, they don't have that legislation. And how is Airbnb's affecting rentals in Alberta?
When we look at the country, and most recently, Statistics Canada put out a report actually just on this that said that restricting short-term rentals do not help housing affordability. The deputy chief economist of the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation came out after reviewing that report and said that he agrees that the data suggests that it's not a pivotal factor in the long-term rental market. Places like Calgary and Edmonton have local rules that are made to support the needs of those individual cities. Same in places like more tourist type destinations, right? I know Canmore is looking at specific rules that work for Canmore. And so I know British Columbians, not too far away from the border, where you're looking at a place that has traditional tourist vacation type rentals and a town. And so there needs to be the right mix of rules that work well for that kind of town. I think the BC government at least address that in places like Whistler, which is very important, obviously, both for the economy of British Columbia, but also for that town. But when we look at rules across Canada, there's a couple of provinces that have started looking at province-wide systems, but it's often in smaller provinces in Atlantic Canada. Quebec has long had a system, but they leave local decision-making to the localities. There may be a provincial-wide registry, but Montreal has its own rules, and Quebec City has its own rules, and Magog has its own rules. Mont-Tremblant has its own rules that are designed to support the needs of those communities. And that's where we think short-term rental rules are best placed. The people closest to the ground operating, who are managing land use and planning and economic development in their communities.
One of the examples put forward to me is was that the example they put forward to me is that the Airbnb owner owns 27 properties and is like this Airbnb, big corporation kind of thing. How much of the Airbnbs is like single or maybe a couple of units as opposed to like many multiple units? Do you guys have a breakdown of that?
I do, and I don't have it right in front of me, but if I recall, it's something like 85 or 90% of our hosts have one unit operating on the platform in the province.
Yeah, so they're basically...
It's just not accurate.
Yeah, I mean, so they use the example and they say it's like almost like a corporation taking out all these, like competing against hotels. And then it's what I've understand from when I talk to lots of people here in this market that it's, like there's a few people like that in this market, but the majority of them have one unit.
There's usually, there can be one or two, but the other thing that makes it hard to actually assess that is that oftentimes people like me who travel for work very, very often will short-term rent out their property and use a property manager to manage that for them. And so people who are doing, basic research and are just looking at the front end of the platform are saying, oh, well, this host has 10 units. Well, that host is managing 10 people's individual apartments when they're away. And so, if it's, someone's cottage or vacation property up on the, the Sunshine Coast, it's obviously maybe they're not doing the cleaning or the individual bookings. There's different ways that people manage the use of their property when they're short-term renting it. And the vast majority of our hosts are doing this on a full-time basis. They're doing this on a very part-time basis throughout the province. They're operating a couple of weeks a year, not on a full-time basis like a traditional accommodation provider would be.
And who are the majority of the users of Airbnb? Like, obviously that you must have some stats on that, or who's actually using Airbnbs versus hotels?
Yeah, I mean, so we have a lot of families obviously using Airbnbs, but what I'm also happy to share is that out of the guests who stayed in an Airbnb in 2023, over 1 million were British Columbians traveling within the province. And so who is going to be most impacted are British Columbians traveling within their province, visiting their friends and family, going on vacation, spending their money, in different parts of the province, going up island to Tofino, or different parts of the interior. And that's really an important part of the BC experience. And so it's disappointing to see, people losing those opportunities to be able to explore their province and travel locally.
And why do you think people choose an Airbnb versus a hotel then? Like, as this option has gotten pretty popular?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of benefits to it. In particular, the fact that you can have a kitchen, the fact that you have multiple bedrooms, that you can travel as a small group. If you have a family or two families traveling together with children, it's much, much easier to do this than renting, two hotel rooms in a city or in some communities where there may not be that traditional accommodation provider. A lot of people are often looking to be able to make their own food or at least breakfast to save money at a time of rising costs and inflation pressures. And so it's important that people have those options for different types of experiences throughout the province. We're also really proud of the unique experiences and unique listings that exist on the platform. I've stayed in like a treehouse up in the Saguenay River area of Quebec, in the far kind of eastern part of Quebec. Some really neat experiences where you can explore the province and enjoy some of the beauty in nature as well as just in another hotel room.
How much of Airbnb's, efforts right now are advocating for Airbnbs versus like managing your growth, or where's Airbnb at in Canada?
So I'd say Airbnb has continued to fare fairly well in Canada. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but a lot of our, there's different things happening, and so we're excited to continue to encourage people to list. And you've seen this in some of our marketing maybe lately, to list rooms when they have extra space available as a way to make ends meet. We saw a lot of people join the platform as inflation started to rise post-pandemic and as interest rates started to rise, particularly here in Canada. We saw a lot of people start renting private rooms on the platform in an effort, like a room in their home where they live, in an effort to make some extra income, to pay that mortgage, to cover their rent costs. And so, I think people have really turned to this as an affordability measure in recent years.
Is there a plan ahead to continue to advocate for Airbnbs in British Columbia? Like you say, you're watching some of the lawsuits and stuff like that. And what are the plans and how are you advocating for Airbnb?
We're going to continue to talk to government. We're going to continue to encourage our hosts to reach out to their MLAs to share why this was an important element of their income, why it's important to have short-term rentals in their communities. One of my colleagues was just at the Union of BC Municipalities Conference in Vancouver all week, and she's out there talking to city council members and mayors about what the impact has been on their communities. And so we're going to continue to work with various levels of elected officials to ensure that they understand, or that they're getting the data that they need, and to listen to their stories about what that impact has been on their communities, so we can bring that back to the provincial government, and so we can work with our hosts to help them return to an income stream that many of them really needed.
Yeah, because I interviewed the jobs minister as well, and I asked her about the Airbnb impact on Kelowna tourism. She said it doesn't impact Kelowna tourism. And then obviously Renee Merrifield in MLA says it drastically impacts it. And then again, the loyal Wooldridge, the NDP candidate, agreed with that. So it would be good to get some solid data, because the Tourist Association should be speaking up if that's the case, and even City Council should be taking a look at it, because we should get to the truth at least.
Yeah, we're going to be monitoring that data as well. So we're watching very closely what the restaurant receipts are looking like, what kind of number of visitors are coming to various cities over the course of the next year. I mean, the law is extremely, extremely new. It's still very early days to be able to do any kind of proper analysis of the impact of this law. And so at the 1 year mark, we're hoping to be able to share that information.
Because can you not see it in Airbnb that if Kelowna is impacted, like Airbnb revenues go down, would some of that go to a different place? If people traditionally came to Kelowna, are they going somewhere else? Are they going to, I don't know, like Idaho or Coeur d'Alene and places like that?
It's very possible. And so we found that in a research study in New York City, where people were saying, well, I'm not going to stay. If prices are going to go up, it's going to be more expensive. And if I need to get 2 hotel rooms because I can't stay with my whole family in one, because I used to book an Airbnb, I might just have to go somewhere else. And so we're going to be monitoring that very carefully, both in terms of domestic travel, but also in terms of international travel, visitors to British Columbia, using some of BC's own data, as well as some data that we can purchase from third-party sources.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in that. I love stats, so maybe we'll check in 6 months and see where we're at here. And then we'll check in after the election. We'll see what happens there too.
Certainly.
Anything else you want to add, or?
No, thanks so much for your time. It's been great. It's been great chatting with you today.
All right. Thank you. That was Nathan Rotman from Airbnb. And we thank you for watching Kelowna Now.